You're sitting at a table with people you genuinely like. The room is warm. Voices overlap. Someone tells a story that everyone finds amusing. You lean forward at the right moments. You laugh when the laughter rises. You contribute when there's a pause. From the outside, nothing seems unusual. But internally, something is happening at a different speed. While the story unfolds, your attention isn't only on the words. You notice the slight delay before a certain detail. The way someone avoids eye contact during a specific sentence. The subtle tension behind a joke that others take at face value. You don't try to analyze. It simply occurs. Your brain links tone with memory, expression with context, content with implication. And in the middle of a perfectly normal moment, you feel that quiet shift, that internal distance. Not because you don't care, not because you're judging, but because you're operating in layers the room doesn't seem to enter. And this isn't new. It has followed you for years.
It happens in smaller places too. At the grocery store, a simple exchange at the register becomes layered. You notice fatigue masked as politeness, micro-expressions that flicker and disappear, the slight irritation in someone's breath. Your brain connects it to larger systems, economic pressure, emotional labor, human behavior under stress. Others leave with groceries, you leave with processed data. Not because you wanted to, because your perception doesn't filter automatically. And after enough of these moments, you begin to ask yourself, why do I feel slightly out of sync almost everywhere?
Some minds don't process in straight lines. They process in networks. Instead of taking in information sequentially, they integrate it simultaneously. While someone speaks, your brain may already be comparing their tone to past interactions, evaluating internal consistency, projecting possible outcomes, simulating how this conversation might evolve. This multi-layer processing happens quickly, often unconsciously. And while it enhances insight, it increases cognitive demand. Functional MRI studies show that individuals with higher cognitive ability often exhibit stronger connectivity between large-scale neural networks. The prefrontal cortex, associated with reasoning and long-term planning, works in tighter coordination with the temporal lobes, responsible for memory and language processing. The parietal cortex joins, integrating spatial and conceptual information. Instead of isolated activation, there is distributed integration. This means your brain is rarely quiet in social settings. It is mapping, and mapping consumes glucose, oxygen, and energy. Sustained integration creates metabolic load, which translates subjectively into mental fatigue, not emotional weakness, biological expenditure.
There is another layer most people don't notice. Even when you're socially engaged, part of your brain may still be internally active. This involves something called the default mode network, a large-scale brain network associated with introspection, self-referential thought, perspective-taking, and mental simulation. For many people, this network quiets down during active tasks. But in highly reflective minds, research suggests that integration between the default mode network and executive control networks can remain stronger. What does that mean in practice? It means that while you are talking to someone, another part of you may be interpreting what they truly mean, simulating their internal state, comparing the present interaction with past patterns, projecting possible future outcomes. You are not only present, you are meta-present. You are experiencing and observing simultaneously. That dual awareness increases insight, but it also reduces immediacy. It introduces a slight cognitive delay, not in intelligence, but in spontaneity. Because part of your energy is allocated to interpretation, and sustained interpretation is exhausting, not emotionally, neurologically.
Psychologist Kazimir Dabrowski described a phenomenon called overexcitability. The term can sound misleading. It does not mean instability. It refers to heightened responsiveness in certain domains. Many intellectually gifted individuals display intellectual and emotional overexcitability. This means curiosity is intense, questions multiply quickly, ambiguity becomes stimulating, emotional nuance is absorbed deeply. You don't just hear a story, you feel its implications. You don't just notice contradiction, you feel the tension it creates. You don't just detect inconsistency, you experience cognitive friction. This heightened amplitude creates richness, but it also increases sensitivity to mismatch. When environments are repetitive, overly simplified, or emotionally flat, the contrast becomes more pronounced, not because you are superior, because your threshold for stimulation is different. And when stimulation is chronically mismatched, the nervous system experiences low-grade dissatisfaction. Not anger, not frustration, just subtle cognitive undernourishment. Over time, that undernourishment can feel like displacement. High neural connectivity, active default mode network, heightened intellectual and emotional intensity, simultaneous pattern detection. From the outside, you look calm. From the inside, you are running multiple systems. Social interaction requires rapid response timing, facial interpretation, vocal modulation, and emotional regulation. If your brain is simultaneously mapping implications, interpreting subtext, simulating outcomes, monitoring your own expression, then your bandwidth is split. Bandwidth depletion does not look dramatic. It looks like subtle withdrawal, shorter responses, reduced eye contact, desire to leave earlier than others. And this is often misunderstood. Others may assume you are distant, you are aloof, you are uninterested. But internally, the opposite may be true. You are saturated. And saturation creates the need for quiet recovery, not isolation,
regulation. There is something that often begins much earlier than adulthood. As a child, you may have sensed that your mind moved differently. You asked questions that stretched beyond the moment, not to impress, not to disrupt, but because your curiosity genuinely extended further. Sometimes the room followed, sometimes it didn't. You may have noticed small reactions, a pause, a confused look, a subtle shift in tone. Why are you thinking about that? It's not that deep. You think too much. None of it traumatic, none of it dramatic. But repetition does not require trauma to leave imprint. When a child repeatedly experiences cognitive intensity without mirrored understanding, something quiet begins to form. You learn to adjust, not because you are ashamed of your intelligence, but because you're attuned to connection. You sense when depth shifts the atmosphere, and children instinctively preserve connection. So you begin to regulate yourself. You simplify your questions, you shorten explanations, you hold certain thoughts internally, and slowly the adjustment becomes natural. Block 09, the birth of internal compression. Over time, adaptation turns into compression. You develop an internal filter. Before speaking, your mind evaluates. Is this too much? Will this complicate the room? Will this create distance? You begin pre-editing yourself automatically, not out of fear, out of habit. Years of subtle mismatch train the nervous system to reduce friction. Reduction feels efficient, but efficiency has cost, because every time you compress complexity, you create a small internal contraction, not visible, not conscious, but cumulative. And eventually, that contraction becomes identity. I'm different. I don't fully connect. I'll always feel slightly outside. But difference was never the full story. Self-reduction was. You were not excluded, you were moderating. And moderation, sustained without awareness, can feel like isolation.
Over time, adaptation turns into compression. You develop an internal filter. Before speaking, your mind evaluates. Is this too much? Will this complicate the room? Will this create distance? You begin pre-editing yourself automatically, not out of fear, out of habit. Years of subtle mismatch train the nervous system to reduce friction. Reduction feels efficient, but efficiency has cost. Because every time you compress complexity, you create a small internal contraction, not visible, not conscious, but cumulative. And eventually that contraction becomes identity. I'm different. I don't fully connect. I'll always feel slightly outside. But difference was never the full story. Self-reduction was. You were not excluded. You were moderating. And moderation, sustained without awareness, can feel like isolation.
There is grief in this experience. Grief for conversations that never reached depth, for insights you held back, for the rare moments when you met someone who processed like you and felt immediate resonance. Those moments feel electric, effortless expansion, layered dialogue without simplification, silence that feels full, not empty. And when those moments end, The contrast sharpens. You realize how much you've been adapting, how much you've been filtering, how often you've been shrinking complexity to preserve ease. And that realization can hurt, not because you blame anyone, but because you see the cost. The cost was subtle fragmentation, external harmony, internal editing. And editing, sustained long enough, feels like loneliness, not because no one is present, but because your full structure rarely is. At some point, something begins to shift. Not because you forced it, not because you found the perfect environment, but because you slowly notice where you contract. You begin to see the pattern, the shortening, the filtering, the internal editing before expression. And instead of expanding outward dramatically, you make a quieter adjustment. You stop erasing yourself internally. Even if you don't express every layer, you allow yourself to hold it. You remain complex in silence. You participate without flattening. You engage without dividing. The goal is no longer to be fully mirrored. It is to remain internally intact. And that shift is subtle. You still notice patterns. You still process in layers. You still feel depth more intensely than most rooms require. But you no longer interpret mismatch as rejection. You interpret it as variance. Not every environment will resonate, but not every environment needs to. You stop searching for constant cognitive symmetry. You begin to conserve energy differently, not through reduction, through coherence. You sit at another table, another ordinary moment. The conversation is light. Stories remain simple. Laughter comes and goes. You still perceive layers. You still sense undercurrents. But this time, you don't chase them. You don't compress them. You don't translate them away. You let them exist inside you, unedited, unapologetic, not performed, not projected, just present. And something almost imperceptible changes. The room no longer feels foreign, not because it mirrors you, but because you stopped negotiating your internal architecture. You stopped dividing into two versions, the adaptive version and the concealed version. There is only structure now, layered, stable, quiet. Belonging is no longer something you demand from the room. It becomes something you carry, not loudly, not defiantly, but steadily. And in that steadiness, the feeling of being out of place softens, not dramatically, not permanently, just enough. Enough to remain, enough to breathe, enough to sit in the ordinary without feeling displaced by it. And perhaps nothing outside has changed, but the internal contraction has loosened. And loosened space feels different from loneliness. It feels like depth without division.